Hello, I'm Michelle Dilley, CEO of Awesome, and I'm thrilled to be sharing an up-close conversation with you today featuring a truly outstanding leader in supply chain. For those of you who don't know, Awesome, which stands for Achieving Women's Excellence in Supply Chain Operations, Management, and Education, is the preeminent leadership community for women executives in supply chain. Over the past 12 years, Awesome has built a one-of-a-kind community by facilitating connections and creating collaborative environments in which our women leaders can connect, learn together, and be recognized. Our work helps women leaders continue to rise across the whole supply chain, every node, function, and role. In this up-close conversation series, I will be speaking with women leaders in our industry who are making a real impact, exploring their careers, their lives, and their passions. Our hope is that these stories inspire you to keep reaching, to keep moving forward, and to keep thinking bigger. For today's video, I had the great pleasure of speaking with Sheri Hinish, Global Executive, Independent Advisor, and Board Member. Known as the Supply Chain Queen, Sheri advises Fortune 500 companies on embedding sustainability in enterprise strategies and scaling advanced technologies and ecosystems to drive measurable long-term value. She is currently an independent advisor and board member, working with organizations worldwide on sustainable innovation, technology adoption, and enterprise transformation. Sheri is a supply chain expert and deeply inspiring leader, and I hope you enjoyed this impactful and engaging up-close conversation. Thank you.
Sheri has the pulse on the supply chain, the industry, what's happening, what we need to be thinking about, and how we should be approaching it. And you know, it's interesting as I talk with a lot of the women that we work with in Awesome, they kind of talk about, I know we're not going to talk about COVID, but they're saying this is almost like COVID 2.0 in today's environment. So, you know, it is such a challenging time, and so many things are coming at supply chain professionals at all levels and at a pace. You talk about pace, right, that we just we haven't seen, or it's not letting up either, right? And it's more and more coming, and it's coming faster. So when you think about that, how are you advising people to lead through this? And like, what should they be thinking about as leaders in this really, really interesting environment that we're finding ourselves in? What tactics do you see that are working well, and maybe some that really do need to change?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's also a really tough question, I think. I had the privilege of seeing Paul Pullman, who's the ex-CEO of Unilever, speak, and he actually opened with some of what I'm about to say at 2:45 p.m. today. And one of the things that he emphasized, and one of the things that I really like to start with, is start with your why and your purpose. And purpose, I feel like, especially in the sustainability space, maybe it's been a little over-indexed or overplayed. But in times like this, where we have a lot of geopolitical risk, where in a values economy, I think a lot of us are being tested. We don't have to hash and claw through what our president said yesterday. But for folks like us in the room, most likely, it's a very personal topic. And when you say supply chain, 40% of the world works in a supply chain. Everyone participates in a supply chain. There are so many issues that we touch in so many ways that we can really have an impact in the world that we share. I think when you say sustainable supply chain, it gets even more broad and complex. And so whether it's geopolitical risk, which has increased, whether it's climate risk, whether it's weather variation, whether it's human rights due diligence, the regulatory environment, all of these things are boiled up to very broad risk management. And if you don't know why you're here, and what you really want to do with your time on Earth, you can fall between the cracks of the noise. And so one of the things that I always like to anchor on is start with your why. And if you will be tested in ways, and we have a really great mix of folks in the room, early hire professionals, some ladies and guys that have been in their careers for 30 years. And it's one of the lessons that I wish someone would have said to me early on, because you start to get feedback and you don't know how to process it. Not every person that gives you feedback is actually meant to be received, and you can respectfully decline the feedback. More on that later. I think, so always start with your why. And also, I think more than anything, always have the courage to be open to new ideas and open to divergent point of views, because it's not until we actually start challenging, and you can challenge in a respective way, that we get to the new and the next. And that's really where we should be thinking. And supply chain and technology go hand in hand. Technology, how many times have we heard about AI, AGI, twinning, IIoT, all the acronyms, but AI in particular, I think, is really going to transform the way that we interact with each other and the world around us.
So let's build off of the AI piece of it just for a second and think about leadership and leading, and for different levels of leaders, where they are in their technology journey or acceptance of technology, I think could also be really interesting and challenging for some organizations. So what would you say to supply chain leaders, and maybe those who aren't as comfortable in embracing the technology piece, because they're going to have to, and they're going to have to give that opportunity for their teams. Their teams need AI to drive more efficient operations.
Absolutely. And if you aren't embracing technology, which I think most of us in the room are, but if you aren't, then you're really in for a tsunami. You will be likely left behind, unfortunately. I would say one of the things that I find, and I've built platforms, and I've AI for Good, for example, I was an ambassador for a few years, and also have built a lot of AI solutions and products. And the cool thing about not necessarily knowing the ins and outs about technology, architecture, and design is that you can still be in your own right a business technologist. And what I mean by that is each of you bring a certain level of talent and your functional level of expertise. And you don't necessarily need to be a technologist. You can be a business technologist, where you're bringing the hard-earned lessons and insights in integrated business process, right? A lot of the change management, tribal knowledge, all the things that happen outside the system that most folks aren't aware of. And most importantly, specifically when it comes to supply chain, you will never get away from the physicality of supply chain. So even if we talk about digital product passport or blockchain enabled end-to-end traceability, and I'm sure all of us know what I'm talking about. Raise your hand if you okay.
If you do or don't.
Okay, just think about this pair of glasses, the materials that are sourced from wherever. Think about how they then go through production, manufacturing, distribution. They go on a truck, a plane, a train, maybe gig economy, car delivery now, and they end up on your doorstep. Okay, that is end-to-end process integration. And now there's traceability and transparency requirements. And so you don't necessarily have to have a background in technology to understand that. When I talk about the physicality of supply chains, even if something is on a blockchain at the material level and you've actually had the ability to trace it and track it, stuff comes out of boxes. You are still moving something, not all the time. Sometimes you're sending files. But just go with this example because it's much easier for me to explain. There's still a very physical nature that you're physically moving things from one place to another. And folks in this room have those insights. And that sort of frame of mind and perspective and challenging what we've always done, That has to show up in technology solutions. It has to show up specifically in AI and Gen AI solutions. When folks are querying or they're looking for things, you're actually building something called contrarian data sets. All the things that you won't intuitively know, that each of you know in this room. That is really important. It's important also that we're stacking hands and that we have cognitive diversity in the solutions that we build, because things happen differently in different parts of the world. And there's been a ton of discussion this week on how entire communities are left out of product design and implementation, particularly in the global South. And so it's really, really important that the solutions that we're building that touch every community, the communities where your brands and organizations operate, those folks are included too, because it touches them too. So it's really important, I think, to make sure that we give ourselves some grace. Maybe we don't know how to necessarily build different technologies per se, but as a business technologist, you should all start calling yourselves that.
That's a great.
So that's all really important. So.
Excellent, thank you. I want to shift a little bit now and talk about climate and sustainability and cost and business. You know, all too often I hear people say, well, we can't go to a more sustainable solution because the costs are incremental to what our current costs are. We just can't afford it, taking the hit on the margin. What would be your response to that? How can we help people to understand the benefits of both, not only helping the climate, but how it can also help the business bottom line?
Yeah, I would say that we are no longer in a cost paradigm. We're really shifting toward a risk and a value creation paradigm. And the reason that that's important is because cost is just one dimension. And if you look, just take sourcing and procurement, for example, traditionally people have always optimized within that lowest cost or lowest price. But on the other side of that is a trade-off, typically externalized risk. Without capturing those risks, and those risks are multidimensional. It could be carbon, it could be water, it could be erratic weather and variability that you're not actually looking for in adaptation scenarios. They're not all just environmental, some are social when you're looking at, wow, this is the lowest cost item if I'm sourcing from the Uyghur region of China, but is there child labor, forced labor, casual labor even in my supply chain, in my supply base? And I think there are probably two things tied to that paradigm shift from cost to risk, value, and value creation. One is the advance of technology. So now we all have one of these, for the most part. Not everyone, but what happens on social media and on digital platforms lives forever. The internet never dies. And so if your brand is caught with their hand in the naughty box, and they actually aren't looking at multidimensional risks tied to ESG, environmental, social, governance risk, that reputational risk can be, in an instant, like really, really harmful. And we all know examples, right? I think the other thing besides technology is people are actually choosing with their values.
I agree.
Right? Yeah. So customer preference, and as the cost of switching becomes more commoditized, people are leaning into, especially as a mom of three, like, would I knowingly support a brand that doesn't give a crap that they have child labor or forced labor in their supply chain? I care. I do have kind of a provocative point of view on, should I have to pay more for an item if a brand is doing the right thing? I don't know that we've cracked that nut, because typically sustainable brands, and I've consulted many, many companies, they often use, it's the green premium, they use it to balance R&D investment, higher margins, typically 15 to 35%. For luxury retail, it could be as high as 60% for some brands if it's a luxury, premium, sustainable item. And they're using that to actually balance the internal hurdle rate in their portfolio of other unsustainable brands. So brands that aren't changing, that aren't modernizing, they're actually using these sustainable green premiums to finance the cost of not complying or switching to just a more responsible way of working and selling goods and services. So I think that the tide is turning with some of the regulatory changes that are happening. Again, the cost of carbon, and it's not just carbon. Water has come up so much. Water equity, that's sort of like the next frontier.
Right.
But definitely carbon, waste. A lot of the EH&S metrics that folks in the room have likely, you've already been doing a lot of the work around lean, green, Six Sigma optimization. Now there's just a different lens. It's connecting an enterprise thread, and then also what's happening outside of your four walls. And let's face it, supply chains are really, really hard to understand. Some of my former clients have hundreds of thousands of suppliers, and they rely on platforms like EcoVadis, for example, or Integrity Next, to try and get a sense of, God, is the person I'm shaking hands with, who I've never met, thousands of miles away, do they do what they say they do? And you'll have desktop authenticity, so maybe they have an ISO certification, or maybe they give you some document that says, yeah, I'm sustainable, I'm doing the right thing, but do you really know? And so I think with technology, it can be a proxy indicator for knowing, but trust is really what people are after. There's no shortage of information. And in order to bridge that trust, which would be the third element, that's really difficult to do. And I think that people choose sustainable products as sort of the last point here, and we'll dig a little deeper, because they want to trust that they're doing the right thing. That's a very human emotion connection to what you buy. And I want everyone to just think, what if what you believed and your why and your purpose was connected to what you wear, what you put on your body, the things you eat, and the things that you put in your body? And I think that experience is what a lot of brands that are really walking the talk, that's really what they're after. And it's difficult. It's possible, but it's difficult.
Who do you think's doing the best?
There are a lot of brands. I think, again, not to be too provocative, but the green premium, it just it digs in my side. I don't think that you should charge everyday folk who want to make the right decision.
I agree.
And again, there was a point in my life where I was a single mom. I had a very limited income, and I would literally be at the shelves and say, I want to do the right thing, but I can't afford to. And that paradigm is something that we really, really have to figure out. The regulatory environment, unfortunately, it doesn't get easier, because you have a lot of acronyms. You have regulatory tax around carbon border adjustment mechanism, or CBAM. You have an extended producer responsibility. So these glasses, if we've done anything naughty when we've sourced, produced, manufactured these glasses in place A, and then it ends up in place D, that community bears the brunt of that pollution, waste, right, risk. Now, some of the regulatory tax that will come to bear soon, it's trying to level the playing field, but it's really hard, because ultimately I think a lot of that cost will be passed on to the consumer, who's just trying to do the right thing. The deforestation regulation, EUDR, again, on its face, really, really amazing, but you end up having a lot of folks in high-risk commodity sourcing that are penalized, and these are folks in the global south. So they're already, barely making margin. We have payment terms that are taking 60 days for the money to actually land in their pocket, and they're getting the shorter end of the stick with a lot of regulation. So it's complex, it's possible. I think there are a lot of brands that I've met this week that are doing the right thing, and it's more importantly, I've met so many young people who are innovators and have startups, and like, it's, my gosh, it's like, it brings you to tears when you meet some of these innovators, because it's the access to capital, oftentimes, especially if they're women, where they're really struggling to get funded. So we don't have a shortage of ideas. I don't even think we have a shortage of coalition of the willing. It really comes down to finance. And that's something that I didn't totally understand, and it's taken me about 21 years to come back to the F word. A different F word, finance. It's so important.
We all know that you're the leading voice of supply chain and sustainability, working with countless clients, partners, countries to build a more sustainable and regenerative future. What are the things that you wish all of us were focusing on right now in relationship to environment, energy, decarbonization, and the like? So what can we do as individuals, and then what can we do as leaders of businesses?
As individuals, care and show up with intention. It's that simple. I mean, there are only two ways this can go. Either you believe that something's dramatically wrong and that we must do something differently in order to save our planet, save humanity, and have breathable air. Or you don't. And I've had this, it started as a debate with Yossi Sheffi from MIT, and he's been on the podcast like 3 or 4 times. And it's interesting because about 8 years ago, he said it's very simple. It comes down to people who are sustainable, or they think it's hogwash and it's total bullshit. And I didn't understand what he was saying then, because it was very quippy and it was very like, come on, this is simple, Sheri, catch up. But I understand it now, because when you walk in a room and you understand your why and you're leading with purpose, you either care or you don't. And if you care and you have an intention, that shows up in your decisions as a consumer. It shows up in your workplace. It shows up in how you reach back and pull and be a door opener. It shows up specifically in product design. Here's what you can do in your role. Product design. We have designed 85% of all ESG related risk into our products, into our networks, into our sourcing, into our technology. So design is probably the very most important lever. And then the second is supplier relationship management and collaboration.
Yeah.
Because supply chain can feel like a web of assumptions when you get beyond tier 1. And really unmanaged, and manage is probably the wrong word, because managed feels like this very colonial way of being like, I'm managing you. It's really around collaboration. And when some of the, there's one customer in CPG that at IBM, they found out that there was child labor in their sourcing of cocoa. And they said, oh, well, we can no longer do business with that supplier. And they were fined, and there was a grievance filed, and it made the news, and it was really, really bad for that particular brand. But what happens in the real world of supply chains is when you move away from that supplier, those women and children are then parlayed into human trafficking.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's no remediation. So when I say like supplier relationship management collaboration, I think the word that comes to mind where you're caring and you have the intention of really making a difference, it's you're remediating. It involves building an ecosystem in your community where you operate. It involves definitely education and capacity building, so there's a better way, there's a teaching component, there's a funding component. I know Unilever has done an amazing job, just Tyson Foods is another, around incentivizing the right behavior. So specifically with Tyson, there's an example where they were helping fund the gap in new farming equipment. Right? Crop insurance is another example where you're incentivizing people to do the right thing, but it's meaningful to them. Payment terms is another. We could go on. Yeah, but I would say those are probably the two most important things that you can lead with in your role. Product design, supplier relationship management, collaboration, and remediation, and being a good friend and steward to others.
Thank you so, so much. Just appreciate everything that you do for us and the time you spent and the insights and the practical advice that you give is just so amazing.